The Sun is about to go into a period of reduced activity, which means Earth is entering a mini ice age. But the really crazy thing is that artificial intelligence now claims this cooling could be triggered by just one single event, and it's happening in 2030. So what's going on? Is there some kind of doomsday event we need to know about? Well, let's look at the data together and find out exactly what's going on. You see, most people are familiar with ice ages as these long-term cooling periods where entire continents get buried under miles of ice. And while the Earth has been gradually getting warmer over the past century or so, in the grand scheme of things, we're actually due for another ice age because the planet's temperature fluctuates naturally in cycles. In other words, if the Gulf Stream slows down significantly, it could trigger an ice age. But the good news is that they don't expect it to slow down completely, but instead to reach a state of equilibrium between the warm and cold water. This would basically mean that the northern United States and Western Europe would experience much colder winters while the rest of the world would become slightly warmer. Scientists are able to use these cycles to predict future temperatures, and they've been saying for some time now that a significant cooling is coming. Well, it's basically a current of warm water that flows from the Gulf of Mexico up to New England and then across the Atlantic Ocean to Western Europe. And it's also responsible for keeping the North American continent warm during the winter months. And others say that it could collapse completely by the end of this century. If that happens, we can say goodbye to those cozy winters in Western Europe and North America. You see, as the sun becomes less active, it will produce fewer sunspots and solar flares. And this will result in less energy being delivered to the Earth. During the last grand solar minimum, our temperatures fell by about 0.5 degrees Celsius, and there was even a decade-long cooling trend that lasted from the 1880s to the 1890s. It could cause problems for us humans because we're living in a world that relies heavily on technology, so even a small change in temperature could have big consequences. According to some experts, if the sun's activity continues to decline, it could eventually dip to a level that's so low we may not come out of it for hundreds or even thousands of years. Basically, it's like a giant heater that keeps us nice and toasty. But unfortunately, it seems like the Gulf Stream might be slowing down. But we actually went through this many times in the past, and it's completely normal. In fact, it's believed that the last glacial maximum occurred around 20,000 years ago when the Earth was about 5 degrees cooler than it is today. You see, the Earth has a bunch of different currents that move around the water. People argue that are we willing to do whatever it takes to survive the upcoming ice age? Don't forget to hit the like button and share this video with friends and family. This is our channel. See you tomorrow. We shouldn't try to fight the inevitable because it's simply a natural part of the Earth's cycle. Others, however, believe that we should take action to mitigate the worst effects of this cooling. They say that we should invest in new technologies that will allow us to survive in a colder climate, had to migrate to warmer regions, and some species went extinct because they couldn't adapt quickly enough. So what's the solution? Well, some experts say that the best thing we can do is nothing at all. And these currents are driven by the wind, which is powered by the sun. This will lead to less precipitation, and this will affect the global water cycle. I think the best approach is to prepare for all eventualities. We should both invest in new technologies as well as develop plans to deal with the worst case scenarios. In either case, it's important to remember that we're not powerless in the face of these changes. We can take steps to protect ourselves and our way of life. What's even more concerning is that the sun is currently in a 100-year cycle and it is nearing the end of its 11-year cycle. When the sun heats up the surface of the ocean, the water evaporates and forms clouds. As the clouds move around, they release their moisture in the form of precipitation. And this helps to circulate the water around the globe. It's called the Gulf Stream because it kind of looks like a river, except it's saltwater. And it's responsible for transporting heat from the tropics to the poles. However, there is still some debate about whether this prediction is accurate or not. But regardless of whether this prediction is accurate or not, there are some important lessons that we can take away from it. First of all, we shouldn't ignore nature because it's always going to find a way to balance itself out. Just because we're experiencing a period of warmth right now doesn't mean that we won't experience a period of coldness later on. For example, one researcher from the Max Planck Institute said that he found the study interesting, but he also said that he wouldn't put too much weight into the details. This could be anything from a solar flare to a terrorist attack. And lastly, we shouldn't forget that we're all interconnected, and what happens in one part of the world affects the rest of the planet. The Gulf Stream might be slowing down, but it's not stopping completely. And this could have far-reaching consequences that we're not yet aware of. He also said that no one can predict the future with certainty. In fact, according to this research, we should have entered a cooling cycle back in 2020, and the low point of this cycle would be reached around 2040. But remember how we said that these cycles fluctuate, and that there are times where the Earth gets warmer before getting colder. It's an anomaly caused by something else entirely. So what exactly is going on here? Well, a new paper was published by scientists from Nanjing University in China, and it uses machine learning to analyze ice crust samples taken from the Arctic. They used samples from the past 70,000 years to train their algorithm, and it was able to accurately predict major climate shifts. Well, it seems like we're about to enter one of those warm periods. And the reason why this is significant is because it's not natural. But even though their model accurately reconstructed past temperature variations, they were shocked to discover that their model predicted an abrupt temperature shift in 2030. The AI identified one major event that was responsible for this shift, and it was the exact same event that we recently reported on. Remember how we told you about the North Atlantic Oscillation being in a positive phase? Well, when the oscillation becomes negative again, it will trigger a rapid temperature drop all over Europe and North America. They concluded that this change in oscillation will lead to a dramatic weakening of the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, which we more commonly refer to as the Gulf Stream. Basically, if this happens, your heating bill is about to go through the roof. That being said, even he admitted that the next decade will likely bring a lot of cooling. Secondly, we shouldn't rely on technology to keep us warm forever, because it is possible that something could happen that disrupts our supply of energy. So what exactly is the Gulf Stream, and how does it work? In fact, it's estimated that without the Gulf Stream, Western Europe would be about 5 degrees Celsius colder than it is today. According to some studies, it's already slowed down by 60% since the beginning of the 20th century. But there are also some other changes that are happening to the ocean currents around the world. However, as the sun begins its cycle of reduced activity, this process will slow down, and this could have serious consequences for the weather and climate. As a result, the atmosphere will cool down, and the water vapor in the atmosphere will also cool. Now it usually goes through these phases of maximum and minimum activity every 11 years, but the upcoming minimum could be the deepest in more than a century. If a similar event happens again, this would basically mean that we're entering a mini ice age that will last for many generations. Now that might sound like a bad thing. The problem is that most of the world wasn't prepared for this sudden change in temperature. The real question is, thanks for watching.